marginal damage. So it's the damage to carbon emissions or particulate matter size 2.5 or size 10 or sulfur or dioxin, just anything that harms people. And we're just directly looking at the emission. When we talked about external cost and marginal external cost, as I mentioned last time, that was directly a private good that you went to the store and bought it, or you had a price on it, and it caused external cost to bystanders. And so the difference is that we use the term external cost as this is the damages to society, to bystanders from something that people bought from a private good. Where now we're just marginal damage is we're just directly going towards any emissions emitted. This is the damage caused by it. We're separating the emission from the private good causing the emission. That's the difference. And then also you got to keep separate our discussion of public goods. So marginal willingness to pay for wetlands. Restoring wetlands is a public good. And so therefore we can look at what is the efficient amount of wetlands to restore is you add up citizens' willingness to pay to restore wetlands, and it's non-viable, so you just add everybody up and you compare it to the cost to restore wetlands. And then you just find the efficient amount of wetlands restored is where your aggregate marginal willingness to pay equals the marginal cost to restore. And one of the benefits, external benefits that you get from restoring wetlands is you reduce damages from runoff. So you're coming at it from two different sides. We're saying fertilizer causes external cost, nutrient runoff that causes algal bloom problems in Lake Erie. That's external cost. We can either solve the problem on the field, or, so if we're not doing that, I'm doing research right now on restoring wetlands to solve the problem. Wetlands are a public good that we have worth for that has many ecosystem benefits, and one of the benefits is it can soak up nutrients and solve the harmful algal bloom problem in Lake Erie. So then you could say like fertilizer causes external cost. You could say wetlands is a public good that causes some external benefits by soaking up nutrients. But so you're looking at it from two different sides. And so external costs are directly just adding up damages, right? So we talked about cars, we talked about fertilizer for cars. It's traffic accidents, congestion, air pollution, greenhouse gas emissions. And we did an in-class exercise. Economists have estimated that's about $2 per gallon of external costs. With fertilizer, the external costs are, since they cause the harmful algal bloom problems in Lake Erie, higher drinking water filtration costs, lower producer surplus and consumer surplus impacting the wildlife fishery, lower consumer surplus from beach recreation, lower property values if you have a house on the lake. You can just directly add those up and say that's the external cost from the fertilizer market. So marginal damage is the same concept. It's just we're now just directly looking at emissions and we're decoupling emissions from the thing causing the emissions. It's like you're just it's like we're just focusing on air pollution and just one particular air pollution, right? It's like you just have there's lots going on here, right? But let's just say it's PM 2.5 emissions equals that. Now we're just looking at we're just estimating the marginal damages directly from PM 2.5. That's only like 1 of 10 of the emissions that comes from burning fossil power. But we're just looking at that specific one. And then we're going to say society's going to be here if we don't do something. And you compare that to, well, how much is it going to cost us in terms of society to lower PM 2.5? Right here is where E starts. But we're looking at each emission separately. Whereas if you're looking at external cost, then you're saying external cost is a private good, and you're looking at all of the external costs, and you're adding up, and you're trying to connect it back to the private good. Now we're just looking at each emission, and we're just doing different. We're just drilling down to each emission. Each emission could have a different graph. So further questions on that? So that's important to see what we're doing differently here. So I mentioned climate change, and so carbon emissions cause damages, and so climate scientists and economists trying to estimate what that marginal damage function looks like. The emission here is now carbon, right? So if we're looking at climate change, we're now saying E is CO2. We're trying to estimate, right, what's this marginal damage function look like as we increase more CO2, more carbon emissions. What are the additional damages from another additional unit of CO2 emissions? And once we have that estimate, then we want to compare it to, how much does it cost to abate it? So we can look at these couple articles here that look at that. Some of the main damage categories are health, agricultural production, and property values. And so the US EPA does make an estimate of this. It's called the social cost of carbon. The social cost of carbon is the marginal damage. The social cost of carbon, if you just type in a search engine, social cost of carbon, that is the terminology that's given. This is the marginal damage from carbon. Okay. So that right now is estimated as this article. So first of all, this is a Brookings paper, what is the social cost of carbon? The social cost of carbon is an estimate of the cost in dollars of the damage done by each additional ton of carbon emissions. That's exactly. Damage in additional, that's marginal damage. Right? Why they need to give it a different name? It's just to try to show that it's a cost to society. But that is, the social cost of carbon is the marginal damage from carbon. Right now it's 109. So this was a little dated. EPA proposed it in 2022, November, and now it's official. So right now, the official estimate, the marginal damage of carbon is $190 per ton. Right? So right now, the official estimate of the marginal damage of carbon is $190 per ton. This gets built into all regulations and you can take my benefit cost analysis class in the spring. Every major legislation or policy at the national level must do a benefit cost analysis, and if it causes carbon emissions, then you must include this number. So that is going to be built in to try to capture the damages from carbon, because if you don't do this, then you're just saying the carbon is zero, like you're just ignoring it. And so it is efficient for our market economy to not ignore it. So put $190 on if you're going to change some policy or project and it's going to cause more carbon emissions, then you got to include that damage as a cost. And so that you can see that would tilt our development in the future towards minimizing carbon, so we don't get that damage. But it varies a lot. I mean, the Trump administration previously estimated it between $3 and $5, and then the Obama administration had it at 50. Biden administration is at 190. It's a big difference between 3 and 190. And so, how is it calculated? It is very incredibly complicated. I could spend the whole class on how you try to estimate the social cost of carbon. I mean, it's incredibly. This is the hardest thing economists have ever tried to do, for sure, without a doubt. It's simply half of all. I'm an environmental economist. Half of all of the papers published are on how we deal with climate change. The hardest problem humanity's ever looked at. The impacts are way into the future, 100, 200, 300 years. There's massive amount of uncertainty. You're trying to predict how it's going to impact weather and climate for the whole globe, how it's going to impact economies, how people are going to respond to that. The science is hard. The uncertainty is large. The impacts are now and into the future. It's a perfect storm of hard. But it's also the largest market failure the world has ever seen. It's the single most important thing in terms of an environmental problem sitting out there. So get going. Right? It's hard, but it's also important. So therefore, the environmental economists and climate scientists are working very hard at it. And this article just goes into it is very hard. Emphasizes that it is hard. I agree with this article. That this article basically says the most efficient way to do this is actually have like an agency completely in charge of doing this separate from the EPA. That's what this article says, because it's too hard. The number that you come up with, each administration changes assumptions to come up with a different number. It is politically motivated. Whether you want the number, if you make the number bigger, you're going to build that into the economy to lower carbon. If you make the number lower, you're saying the damages are lower. Let me do that. So what's the point of right on our graph? What does this mean? So anyway, let me finish up here. So the point of this article is have an interdisciplinary agency with scientists, economists, and business groups, and get everybody together and come up with a social cost. So I agree with that. There's large uncertainties and it's hard. So what this is saying in words, dollars, E. So it's always dollars and E. And the only thing we got to change is, well, what E are we talking about? I mentioned several E's. Right now, the emissions I'm talking about is CO2, so carbon. Carbon E emissions. So we're basically saying we're making a target that 150, I say 151. What's the number right now? 190. It's 190. $190. Right, this is our target. I should move it over more. I don't make it accurate. I got to do it again. I'm going to do a specific example. I'll try to make it accurate. So let me shift up here more. Original image. I'm going to make the target look right here. 90. This is E. E here is carbon emissions. We just ignore it and do nothing. We're over here. E max means do nothing. Right? We just completely ignore it. We make no effort whatsoever to lower carbon emissions. And so then if we know what our abatement cost is, right? So again, you have to read marginal abatement cost from right to left. Right, I go this way. You read that from right to left. It's going to start cheap and it gets more expensive. So what this is saying is, right? If we say in any policy or projects that must pass a PCA, we're saying the social cost of carbon or the marginal damage from carbon is $190 per unit of emissions, right? Carbon emissions per unit. Usually it's a ton, right? So this E is a ton of carbon emissions. Then what this is saying is, what you proved last time in your class exercise, is if you can abate emissions for $50, is it efficient to do it? Is it efficient to, you can do something and lower some emissions for $50. Is it efficient to do it? Yes. $100? Yeah. 150? Yes. 180? Yes. Where do you stop? When you get to 190, stop. If you say, right, so you're going this way, and that's how we get to E star. And this is going to be like a 90% reduction. Right? We're not going to, it's not efficient to lower carbon emissions a little bit. It's efficient to practically get rid of all of it. Not all of it, because some is just too expensive. The abatement cost gets too high, but 90+% for sure. Right, so 180, do it. If you tell me now it's going to be 200, all right, don't do it. That's too expensive. 190 is where you stop. But there's been an incredible amount of effort to find that number. And that is getting built into our economy. This is the number that officially is by the EPA and must be built in. I did 4 grants last spring where I did benefit cost analysis for these projects, for transportation projects. for federal, if you want to get federal transportation dollars, you must do a BCA, and they've gotten really strict on saying make sure your BCA is done well. And a lot of projects got declined because their BCA wasn't done well enough. So they're calling me up and saying we need a good BCA. I'm the man. My entire thing is doing BCAs. So there's 70 pages of guidance from the U.S. Department of Transportation and a whole spreadsheet of how you do this accurately. And that's the number that's in there. So okay, let's see which one. Steel plant in West Virginia on the Ohio River that wants to expand its port to expand barges, to expand the ability to bring recycled steel in by barge rather than by rail. And transporting anything by water is the cheapest way. Not just cheapest, but cheapest also in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, carbon emissions, and air pollution. The amount of steel you can transfer in a barge versus on a rail or by truck, you have way less pollution if you can transport it by water. And so it's going to lead to less carbon emissions. So how do I include in the BCA? If you expand your barge transportation, and therefore you can bring in that recycled steel to bring into your plant more by barge, then you're displacing rail and truck. And if you're displacing rail and truck, you're reducing carbon emissions. What's the value to be included in the benefit cost analysis from the less carbon emissions? It's $109 a ton. And I haven't heard yet, but I totally expect them to get the grant. And that is that an efficient change? Absolutely. If you can transport something by water, do it. It is in terms of not just to transport it, but also factoring in external costs and damages from pollution. From the viewpoint of society, we want everything to go by water if it's possible. And then I also did the same project for the Toledo Port Authority. They also want to expand water transportation, so I did the exact same thing. Absolutely, expand water transportation so it displaces rail and truck, right? Get semis off the highways, get less rail, and therefore we will be transporting things more cheaply, but also with less pollution and greenhouse gas emissions, right? So we want that built in. Okay, so let's do the Toledo Port Authority. Haven't heard yet. I expect them to get the money as well. Toledo Port Authority. Benefit cost analysis. Expand ability for water transport. Okay, so if you increase water transport, you are then decreasing rail and truck transport, which means then you're decreasing emissions. Whole bunch of them. I mean, I did sulfur, nitrogen oxide, fine particulate matter, 10 and 2.5, and carbon. 5 different emissions are included. So it was, I don't know, nitrogen, whatever, oxides, sulfur, nitrogen. I did PM10, PM 2.5, and carbon. I included in my benefit cost analysis. Just the carbon one. What I included that? I included that at $190 because the government said so. And so if we do water transport, you're reducing rail and truck transport, you're reducing emissions. One of the emissions you're reducing is carbon, and it's $190 per unit of carbon reduced, gets included as a benefit, right? And so again, reducing marginal damage is a benefit. Okay? So that's included as a benefit in a BCA. And so all of these projects all across the nation get submitted to the Ohio Department of Transportation, right? And so if this number is bigger, then the projects that are going to get funded this is going to come into benefits, and they're going to go up in terms of benefit cost ratio. And so more of the projects that are going to get funded are going to be the ones that reduce carbon more. And I only work on projects that I step back as an economist, and they ask me, will you help us on this? And I look, and I give me your proposal, and I read the proposal, and I ask myself, is this an efficient use of our taxpayer dollars? And if the answer is yes, then I'm going to help you. If I think, I turn people away because I'm like, I don't want your project to get funded. I'm not going to help you. I tell them that. I'm like, there's not enough benefits here in terms of the cost. This is not efficient use of our taxpayer dollars. And I usually give them advice. Here's what you need to change before I would help you. If you want to make these changes, come back to me. But what I've learned through these 2 projects is if anybody's going to come talk to me about water transport, I'm helping them. Right? I've now learned as an economist that it is the most efficient way to transport anything. We underutilize water, and we are inefficiently overutilizing semis on the interstate. The external costs are massive that you get here from you're clogging up interstates that other cars are on. You're having more accidents, more congestion, more road damage, the absolute maximum amount of pollution per the amount that you're traveling. It's definitely, of course, rail's better, but truck's the absolute worst. I mean, if you can avoid truck, do it. From the viewpoint of society, right? I do my role as being an economist through and through, and saying we're going to do BCA and look at everything. What do you want to do? So I think those 2 will get funded. So this is, in class, we're just going to throw up a graph and look at it, but there's a massive amount of work for every single emission. There's a dollar value in the BCA. If you reduce PM 2.5, here's the value. If you reduce PM 10, if you reduce nitrogen oxides, if you reduce sulfur oxides, if you reduce carbon, right? Every one of them has a dollar attached to it. And that in part, it very massively determines the projects that get funded to move into the future. Okay, questions you have on that? Okay. Another example, I just saw this one. So let's say we switch to electric cars, and electric cars are powered by renewable sources of energy. We've talked about this, so that would be, all right, so If we have electric cars and renewable sources of energy, then we mostly eliminate, I think primarily eliminate greenhouse gas emissions. Most local air pollution is eliminated. My understanding, though, is when you push the brakes and tires, you still get some emissions from brakes and tires. But you still have traffic accidents and congestion. Right? These are actually the major external costs. Right? So you don't get rid of all the external costs, but you get rid of 2 of the 4. Where's my? Something fall down there. Where'd it go? All right, it must be in there. Oh, there it is. I got stuck in there. So what's this graph saying? New graph I just saw. United States deaths per 10,000 vehicle crashes. So one of the major external costs is if we all go out and drive more, we crash into each other. A major issue is cars' weight. It's particularly in the United States, we have cars that are 2,000 pounds and cars that are 7,000 pounds. So what this is showing, risk in your own car. Right? So why might you want a bigger, heavier car? Right? It does reduce your own risk. As the car gets heavier, right? So this is like this way is increasing in weight, right? And this way is increasing in risk. So we want you to yourself want that risk to go down. And so there is some risk reduction from 2,000 to 4,500, and then it gets pretty flat after that. Your risk goes down, but there's really no benefit. It's diminishing returns. There's very little extra risk reduction to you if you get about 4,500 pounds to 7,000 pounds. What would I label risk in the other car? What's the term we would use for that? In terms of our economic terminology, what's the risk in the other car? How would we include that? So you buy a 5,000, you buy a 6,000 pound car because you just want it to be safer for you. Okay, well, what's this? Not tricky. Just the terminology we use to say risk in the other car. Yes, it would be marginal damage, or if we're directly linking it to the car you bought, what would we more specifically call it? I mean, we use the term marginal damage if it's directly from an emission. This isn't from an emission. This is directly from a car that you went to the store and bought. So what would we label it then? This is external cost. This is directly an external cost. You bought a giant car so it was safer for you, but you just massively. But you have a car bigger than everyone else out there. It's a little safer for you, but you just made it. You just increased accidents for everybody else you crashed into. That's directly an external cost, right? So this risk to the other car, the bystander, that is separate, that you're not thinking about. You're thinking about buying a heavier car is safer for you and your family. You are not factoring in that buying a 6,000 pound car does even decreases your risk a little more, but you aren't factoring in that you are likely not crashing in to somebody else in a 6,000 pound car. And you just dramatically increased the risk of danger of serious accident to everybody else. And this is perfectly rational, right? I drive to Iowa, it's where I'm from with my family, my 2 kids, right? I want to be safe, right? So maybe I buy a 6,000 pound car to be safe, but if I do get into an accident, I'm a little safer, but it's a massive external cost to bystanders. They are much more likely to harm. So what does this mean in terms of policy? What would be some efficient policy solutions here? Yeah, and what does this graph say would seem like would be a good limit?
3,500.
I mean, the cross at 3,500, okay, maybe you go a little bit, but when does this really start taking off? I mean, certainly 5,000. Like, don't let anybody drive a 7,000 pound car or a 6,000 pound car. I mean, okay, maybe you need a bigger car. Like you don't want to say every car has to be exactly the same weight, right? We want to provide some range, but I mean, certainly 4,500, right? Why don't we just say the limit is equals 4,500 pounds? So you can be from 2,000 to 4,500. That's a big range, but you can't go out and drive a 7,000 pound car. And it's not it's not that limiting from 7,000 to 4,500 doesn't change your own risk very much, but it massively reduces the external cost to everybody else. We have no limits, right? I have a friend who owns an electric Hummer. That thing's 7,000 pounds at least. It's massive. It's a tank. Super fun to drive. It'll accelerate faster than almost most sports cars. That's what electric cars do. They can just go. You have a 7,000 pound car that can go from 0 to 60 in 4 seconds, whatever, I don't know what fast is, 6 seconds, 7 seconds. Maybe you have a couple drinks. You're just like, the external costs just blow up. So that's things to be factored in from the viewpoint of society, right? This graph says, and you say, hey, I can have the freedom to buy whatever car I want. You have the freedom to do whatever you want until you start causing external costs. And then as economists, we back up and say, from the viewpoint of society, I'm going to treat your risk and the other's risk equally. I'm not giving you less weight as a driver. I'm just giving you and everybody else equally. And if we care about everybody equally, then from the viewpoint of society, you can't drive a 7,000 pound car. It's sufficient to make that change, to limit the external cost, to balance your own risk and the bystander's risk. That's an efficient policy. I can prove it, right? So it's sitting right there, 4,500 pounds. We don't do that, right? We have very tiny cars and we have 7,000 pound electric Hummers. That's a problem. That's why I could show you another chart driving in the United States is more than 10 times more risky than other developed countries. It's primarily because we drive more, we go faster, and we have bigger cars. And it's not, if we all had 7,000-pound tanks, that would be less risk, although again, just using basic physics, if you have something big going fast, even if they crash into each other, it's still more damage than if they were smaller. So it is policy, right? We just have less policy on cars and driving in the US. And it is the external costs are pretty massive. I mean, it's your age, what's the single most riskiest thing you do as a college student? You know what the answer is? Why do you think that popped into my head? What's the single riskiest thing you do? You get in your car, you drive somewhere. It's not even close. It's the single riskiest thing you do. As you get, if you're 80, okay, it's going to be cancer or heart disease. But young and healthy, get in your car and be safe, because that's the single riskiest. I have 2 teenage boys. As every parent, single greatest thing I worry about everywhere, drive safe. All your parents are like, drive safe. Because it is the single riskiest thing to do. And we don't have policy that helps protect you. Because you're probably driving a small, cheap car because you're poor. And if you run into my friend with a 7,000-pound Hummer, you better really hope he's being a safe driver. So hopefully that makes sense. External costs, we have to call it external costs. That's directly from the Hummer. If I want to say emissions from a gas-powered car, then we can use marginal damage. So we're using terminology specific, like this external cost. Right? This is from a heavy car that you bought. This is a private good. This is a private good, and you bought it, and it causes external cost. I wouldn't even call this an emission. This is not an emission. It's clearly an external cost. Now, if it was a private good and it was a gas car, and I was looking at it, I was doing a BCA transportation from someone, roundabouts. Let's say somebody came to me and said, we want to get a grant to install roundabouts. And this does reduce congestion at stop signs, which means then it keeps cars flowing, which means it is going to reduce some emissions. Well, now I can talk about marginal damage. Right? If we can link it to emissions, we can do marginal damage. But if we link it to something, then we use external cost. Right? This is just different terminology to look at different things. Our roundabouts, what do you think about roundabouts? Oh, good. Now you had guess. I ran into a lot of people hate them because it's something new and it's like, I don't know what to do. But that's the whole point. But number one is you have to pay attention. You slow down, you pay attention, and you just keep moving, but you really got to make sure that you coordinate with what other cars are doing. And there still is some accidents in roundabouts, but everybody's going slower, right? And so even in a big car, if you're only going 10 miles an hour, the damage is not going to be very serious. With stoplights, the issue is you're just like, well, the light says green, it's my turn to go. Yeah, well, they had a red light and they weren't paying attention and they just plowed into you at 50 miles an hour. So roundabouts avoid that. Nobody's going fast. And everybody's paying attention. And so it takes more mental effort on your part to navigate a roundabout, but it's dramatically safer. It reduces, so it's not just reducing congestion. The primary thing is it's just safer. And it reduces congestion. The traffic keeps flowing. And so it's efficient. It is efficient to take every traffic light turn into a roundabout if you can. It doesn't make sense everywhere, but if you can do it, absolutely. And so we are slowly making that transformation, and they are efficient. It is a better way. It is a better way to have traffic flow. Okay, any questions? BCA is everywhere. I think my BCA class can know more, but this is related to sometimes all environmental problems are go through BCA as well. All right, so what we did last time is we just looked at an E and we did this. Did I finish some questions? No, okay. Renee had some questions. Get sidetracked. So I talked about greenhouse gas emissions and carbon, a burden on poor communities. Fundamental problem here is that sustainability is a privilege. So that's an important point. Yes, we have. I talk about efficiency a lot because that's what the whole point of all these graphs are: is finding the minimizing external costs, finding the efficient amount of emissions of pollutants. And I think without an econ class, I'm not sure that's a concept that really gets discussed. If you've taken many environmental science classes or environmental classes, you would focus on the damage of something, and it's as if it's just, well, lowering pollution is always better. Almost always, but at some point it gets too expensive, and then you stop. Right? That's the looking at it from the viewpoint of economists. Is getting rid of pollution, it costs money, and if you let it happen, it costs money. So where do we stop? Right, where those two marginal things, the cost of marginal damage, and cost of curves intersect. That's efficiency, but also fairness. We also want to look at that as well. If we had corrected taxes on private goods causing external costs and directly on emissions causing marginal damages, it is true that these are basically sales taxes, and all sales taxes are regressive, which means lower income households bear more of a burden of those taxes than higher income households. But you can make any tax fair. I absolutely 100% promise you any tax could be made fair, where you could tax it and then take some of the money to just get it back to lower income households to help them assist and change to adapt to it. And so you can make any environmental corrective tax or emission tax both efficient and progressive, meaning the more of the burden falls on higher income households. I mean, the example I gave was Canada, right? Canada has a tax on carbon, and they just rebate it back to citizens lump sum. So 80% of the citizens actually come out ahead, and the richest 20% are subsidizing everybody else. So it's progressive and efficient. So that is important, but it is. I don't talk about this enough, but because this is the goal. But you can always achieve an equality, fairness goal, whatever society wants, while also doing efficiency. It is possible. Renee also asked, again, how affect poor communities. How does this affect individuals? So I didn't mention this last time, but I mean, if we were going to do a carbon tax in the United States, and again, what would we tax that? Well, right now, if the marginal damage, if the best estimate of the marginal damage from carbon is $190, That we're like saying, like we said before, if you place it, if we know the damage, then now you know the tax. Then the efficient corrective tax on carbon is $109 per ton. Just how are we going to implement that? In the United States, there are 710 coal mines, 140 oil refineries, 551 natural gas processing plants. That's it. You just go right there, put a little meter, and you say, hey, every ton of carbon coming out of your air, send us $190. That's it. You're done. It's the simplest tax in the world to implement. And then that will filter through to everything that uses carbon, right? Obviously, on the oil refineries, that goes into making gasoline. And so when you show up and buy gasoline, that carbon tax is going to get passed on to you, and you're going to pay more for gasoline. If you heat your home with natural gas, that cost is going to get passed on to you. If we're using coal for electricity or natural gas, then your electric bill goes up. But that's such a massive amount of revenue. You could give some of it back to lower income households to make sure that they get more than fully compensated for their extra gas price and electric bill. But it's incredibly easy. You don't put it on people. You just put it on the source of the pollution, and it will filter through to people anytime you buy gas or heat your home with a fossil fuel. But the point is, then that's going to make gas prices go up, which then will quicken the transition to electric cars. And it will make your utility bill go up if it's powered by coal or natural gas, which will quicken the transition to powering it from solar or wind. So that's the whole point of putting a price on it. So it helps us move away from this thing causing climate change more and more quickly than we would otherwise. So it can always, I don't talk about this enough either, but just look up, go into a search engine and type in Cancer Alley, right? I mean, there's an 85-mile stretch along the Mississippi River in Louisiana where a lot of these refineries are. Where do you think these refineries get placed? You think they're next to $1 million homes? No, it's the burden of pollution is disproportionately on the poor citizens, always. So if we switch away from fossil power, the biggest beneficiaries will be the poorest communities because they are the ones that are disproportionately bearing the burden of this pollution. So I want to emphasize that this is, solving climate change, cleaning our air, making Lake Erie cleaner is both efficient and I would argue it's fair. Who goes walleye fishing? It's a pretty cheap source of recreation. It is generally lower income citizens do that than the richest people who can take the private jet and go somewhere else. So cleaning the air, cleaning the water helps lower income citizens more. And so it's both efficient and fair. So they're very important questions. That's why I spent time. Thank you for Renee and Noah for asking that. It gives me an opportunity to expand upon things that we're talking about. Excellent questions. Macy, eco-marginal principle. All right, so that's the last one. Let's look at eco-marginal principle again. So that's right here. We did this last time as this in-class exercise, right? We just looked. And so we did that. Look it up. There are the answers. And so, this is going this way is total abatement cost. This is total damage, and we want to minimize it. So maybe it would be helpful if I just look at it without all these letters. Okay. Let me draw it one more time and emphasize the eco-marginal principle. So dollars, emissions. So I always go here first. Remember to draw it left to right. You start at Emax. This is the. I always just put this arrow on the end to remind me right to left. Go that way. Marginal damage goes this way. Where they intersect is the star. So you just label here. Let's just label it instead of a letter. Right? This is the total damage. Right? That's the total damage in the area under the marginal damage curve. Right? So total damage equals sum up marginal damage from E0 to E star. This is under here the total abatement cost we've incurred. Right? This is sum up marginal abatement costs. But you got to go from right to left, from E max down to E star. Right. So this is going this way. This is going this way. That's the key. The total abatement cost you read from right to left, going down from E max to E star. The total damage you go from left to right, right from 0 up there. And so what we're saying here is E star minimizes total social costs, which equals. So we're just adding these two together. Right? Total damage plus that. So what we proved last time is if we are at E2, let's say. We're not at E star, we're at E2. At E2, this is the margin. So this is the marginal damage at E2. Right? So there's numbers to it. Say it's $200. Let's say this is at 150. Here, the marginal abatement cost, if that's 150, this looks like about 75 equals at E2 equals 75. So we can compare the two. The eco-marginal principle says. Marginal says at E2, the marginal abatement cost is less than marginal damage cost, so reduce E until at E where they're equal. Marginal abatement cost equals marginal damage. So again, the eco-marginal principle is a stopping rule. At E2, it's $75 to get rid of that emission, but if we let it come out of the pipe, it's going to cause $200 of damage. Oh well, yeah, we want that. We want to go there, but keep going. Keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, stop. That's the eco-marginal principle. And that's going to be right at 150, right? That's going to be $150 just where they're both 150. So that's what the marginal principle says. And then we proved, and so if you stay at E2, the problem is then, right, this area, all of this area here is extra, additional, let's just say extra. This is extra total social cost. More than the minimum. This is the minimum. And if we're at E2, then that's the total social cost we're incurring. So we're not at the minimum. You're incurring extra cost for no reason. That's the extra total social cost. And since we're on this side of it, all of that extra total social cost is from, okay, we didn't reduce emissions enough. So it's under MD, so it's total damage, right? So it's extra. And specifically here, it's extra total damage. Right? And that's what we proved. If you stop at E2, you're incurring, I could say two things. You're incurring extra total social cost in the minimum. The minimum is this. Total social cost is total damage plus total abatement cost. And specifically, this extra total social cost is coming from extra area under the marginal damage curve, so it's extra total damage. Right? So we are extra total damage means, right, emissions is inefficiently too high. E2 is greater than star. Right? We have too much emissions still being happening, so we have extra total damage, so we are not minimizing total social cost. And then the other half of your proof is that if we went to the other side, then you go too far. So if we are over here and we reduce it to E1, this is also over here, extra total social cost. But where does all that extra total social cost come from now? What's causing the total social cost to be higher at E1 instead of E star? Where's it coming from? Abatement cost. It's all the extra area under the map, right? So now it's extra total abatement cost because now E1 is less than E star. Right? You actually went too far. We are actually, if someone wanted to use the terminology overly burdensome environmental regulations, I would say, oh, you think that we've efficiently reduced emissions too much. We incurred too much cost than where it was efficient. This is the graph you'd have to show me to tell me that that's true. I can tell you, as someone who studied this for 20 years, I probably should try hard to think of some examples, but I would have to it would be 1 out of 1,000. 999 times out of 100, we're over here. And I can tell you that we have done some things to lower emissions, but it would be efficient to do more than what we have done. There are probably a few examples. I mean, the one that kind of comes to mind is, I'm even hesitant to say it because I'm probably wrong. Like asbestos. Our regulations on asbestos has been like zero. Like one of our offices was found to have a little bit of asbestos old from forever ago in the fluorine, and then it's just like environmental regulations say tear it all out. And it's super expensive. I don't know, maybe that one's kind of overdone. That's like it. That's like the one example I can think of. Almost everything else, we're staying over here. Now, what I also emphasized last time, though, if it is in your selfish interest to have less environmental regulations, what are you going to emphasize? What is it in your interest to emphasize? It is in your interest to emphasize the total abatement cost and act as if we are over here. Business groups are going to emphasize this always. Environmental groups are going to emphasize this always. That is what their interest group is. Like, business groups want to be more over here, and environmental groups are going to emphasize this more and want to be more over here. And the point is, well, there's an answer that's just right. Just estimate it all. If you tell me if we can estimate the marginal damage from carbon, then you can estimate the marginal damage from anything. That is the single hardest problem that climate scientists and environmental scientists and economists have ever tried to do, and we've been working on it for decades. So you can do it for anything, and we can just look to see how much it costs to abate it in terms of the technology. So there is an E star for everything. That is the right answer. And it can be done. Okay, so this is an important graph because now we're deconnecting emissions from the good causing it, and we just look at each one separately. That's it. I don't think I can have any more useful to say on this graph. So is that clear? Any more questions on this? That's everything from chapter 5. Okay, so now we're in chapters 11, 12, and 13. All right, I'm going to tell you one more story, and then we'll move on to chapters 11, 12, and 13. A little bit of a history lesson. This is a different textbook. When car society really took off in the 40s and 50s, I just think we're so far removed from this. I think it's important to have a little bit of history here. All right, so back in 1954 in LA, if there's a thermal event that just kind of traps the pollution, it doesn't dissipate. Stings the lungs, breathing is painful, right? Burns your throat, irritates your eyes, absolutely causing lasting respiratory ailments. Just massive. Visibility, reducing visibility. So this is when California, this is in Los Angeles. So at the time, they just you just can't fly planes. They dramatically tried to minimize traffic and shut down planes. You can't go outside. Everyone had to stay inside. School was canceled. This was happening because we were making no effort whatsoever to reduce pollution from cars. And so that's when the California Air Resources Board started. This was in '67. Governor Reagan at the time, which of course became President Ronald Reagan, set up the agency, California Air Resources Board. And so they implemented very strict technology forcing regulations, meaning that they force cars, like if you want to build a car and sell it, you have to get rid of these emissions that are clogging the air. And of course they did that. First thing they invented was the catalytic converter, which of course is mandated on all cars now. Was it successful? Catalytic converters reduced the emissions out of a tailpipe to 1% of what it was in the 70s. Right? Incredibly, it only costs like an extra $300 to put it on the car. So it reduces these emissions by 99%. So that's it, right? Incredibly efficient technology to mandate to have on cars. I think no one would argue with that. What is still unregulated in California and here in Ohio? Lawnmowers, leaf blowers. You just pour some gasoline in them and you run them. And they were left out. And they are still these small gas engines. So California is now looking at ways to reduce these. They are, this was 8 years ago, so it's probably true now. Because cars have such strict air pollution regulations, these guardian equipment and gas-powered lawn guardian equipment, they now surpass all of the cars on the road. Have you driven in LA? I've been out there. There's one interstate that's 20 lanes. It's 10 this way and 10 this way. It's completely a car-centered society, right? That develops and blew up in LA, after since the 50s, and so it doesn't have like the public transportation like the East Coast does. Just people using leaf blowers and lawnmowers causes more pollution than cars now. Why do you think that is? Because there's no regulations on lawn equipment. These small gas engines. Is that efficient? That's not efficient. And the article talks about this as an environmental justice issue. Who are that pollution dissipates, but who it impacts the most is the person right there running the equipment. Are the richest people mowing your yard? No, the poorest people are mowing your yard. It is always true that the poorest citizens get the impact from pollution the most. I can hardly ever not think of an example where that's not true. So if we made a law that said all gas-powered equipment, even these small engines, must have the same technology that we require for cars, equipment's going to cost a little more. It's going to cost you as a rich person a little more to mow your yard, but the people doing the mowing are going to get the massive health benefits from that. So it is both efficient and fair, right? So that would be right, the gas smell, headache, and it is definitely impacting the people doing it the most. And now we're to the world where it can even be cheaper, right? This person said, this electric equipment, then I wouldn't even have to buy gas. I'd have less things to repair. I just plug it in. Like we can, if a cleaner substitute just becomes flat out cheaper anyway, then our market economy will move that way. But you don't see it happening enough. I have an electric mower. It's awesome. I don't know why anybody doesn't have one. It cost me $200. I mean, I don't have to change gas. There's nothing equipment. I just put a battery in it and I mow the whole yard. So this is an incomplete information market. I just don't think people are yet aware that why are you still using gas when it's you can buy an electric. These small engines, electric really makes sense because you don't need a lot of power. So that could be an incomplete information market failure. Maybe people just aren't as educated yet. But in the 50s, California started fixing their cars. Regulations on cars, which we now have. It was 75 years ago, but we went 75 years with nothing on engines. The technology's there. That proves my point. You don't get the efficient solutions unless regulations come in place. Because buying a little gas mower with a $50 with something in there, a $50 piece of technology to lower emissions. So you're a person and you run a lawn operating system, and you just need to replace the equipment. And a lawnmower with a gas-powered lawnmower with this technology in place is going to be it's like a really fancy one. Maybe it's $3,000, or you can get one for $2,800. You buy the $2,800 one every time because it minimizes your costs, and it's a very competitive, right? If you bid a little bit higher than somebody else mowing the yard, you don't get any business, and the person mowing the yard, they pick the cheaper firm. So a market economy leads firms to have competition to always be trying to minimize costs, which usually is great, except when it's pollution, except when it's an external cost, except when they are going to ignore it, but society is going to bear the burden of it. Then you must have government regulations to force the technology, or it's not going to happen. So hopefully that's another example there to emphasize that. So if we drew the graph, it would look like, so let's do, last example, then I'll go into chapter 11. So if we did gas cars and gas mowers. So all cars do have very stringent regulations. So like Emax would be we're doing nothing, and it is pretty cheap, right? We have dramatically, you can't get it to zero, right? We reduced some of these emissions 99%, but that last 1%, like you can't get emissions to zero from a gas car. The only way you get emissions to zero is start driving electric, right? That's why it's efficient to make that switch. Right? This is the marginal abatement cost, right? And so when you look at the marginal damage, right? So E star is, right, we're talking about 99% reduction in emissions here, right? But not zero. All right, it's not expensive to do this for mowers or lawn equipment or leaf blowers either. It's probably the same marginal abatement cost. These are just smaller gas engines. There's nothing different about them in the car. They're actually simpler. And the damages are pretty high now, so lots of people use them. And it's one of the biggest sources, so let's just give it similar. So E star is the same. E star hasn't changed. So we've had efficient regulations to reduce E. Where are we at? We're probably E now right here with mowers, because we have not had efficient regulations to reduce E. Right, so that's the summary of what I've shown. Where we actually are depends on regulations. E star, what we're doing in class tells us where it's efficient to go. You just assume we're sitting here until we have government laws in place that move us away. Right? That's the point. We've done nothing. Right? You go. I've driven around Toledo. You go look at anybody equipment they're using. It's so polluting. You just see smoke coming out of these engines because there's just no regulations at all. So that's a failure. That's a government failure. And so we can say is, well, we're sitting over here and it's efficient to be here. And what's screwing up? Government failure. The government is screwing up to regulate small engines the same way they do cars. And maybe it wasn't a big deal 75 years ago because there wasn't a lot of this equipment. But now that as we become richer society, you pay people to mow your yard, to blow the leaves, and you're not using a rake, and it's more gas-powered equipment, and it has become the majority of our pollution because it's not regulated. And now, what I mentioned a lot last thing is we have cheaper substitutes right now for electric mowers. And soon, soon electric car. I can tell you right now, electric mowers go by one. There's no reason to have a gas car. Soon, we're not quite there yet. Within 5 years, batteries will be so cheap that electric cars alone will be cheaper to buy than gas. So then we can get rid of lower much more of these emissions by just buying a cheaper substitute. All right, any further questions, comments? Right, I like to be an applied guy, right? I don't want to just draw a graph and move on. The whole point is, I think you might forget the graph, but you'll remember the relevance of it, how it applies to what we see. Right, the whole point of education is to explain the world as it is. As a scientist, that's normative, that's positive economics, and then you can have whatever your opinion you want your opinion to be, but at least make sure it's based on the science as we know it, so you can have better opinions. All right, so that's it. I'm done with chapter 5. So it's everything I can think of that's useful. If we're going to draw a new graph, I'm really going to take it out for a spin and get as much mileage out of it as possible, so we can help be scientists and help understand the world as it is. So that's the marginal abatement cost, marginal damage graph. So now we're going to chapters 11, 12, and 13. And so I'm going to do these together because chapter 11 is about standards. Chapter 12 is emission charges, right? So I'll be like a carbon tax. And chapter 13 is, your book calls it transferable discharge permits. If you've heard the term cap and trade, that's what cap and trade is. So we'll compare. So we've established our framework to decide efficient government policies. And now we have, okay, well, what are three big boxes of options? Standards, charges, cap and trade. Those are the kind of the three big buckets of rules. So we'll start with chapter 11. You might also see this called as command and control. It just means that the government just mandates behavior with laws that are legally binding. These are legally binding standards, right? So again, this is what California started and the whole rest of the country adopted for cars. It was like, if you want to sell a car, you better figure out a way to get the emissions coming out of the tailpipe lower, or you're not selling a car. It's command and control. It's like, we're telling you to do that, or there's going to be massive penalties and fines. And there are two types of standards. There's either emission standards or there's technology standards, right? We're just looking at big buckets here. So emission standards is a legal limit on emissions, right? So you're just looking at sulfur emissions from coal. Right, the EPA has limits on how much emission can come out of the pipe when you're burning it. Or you can just have technology standards, where the government just requires the use of a certain technology to lower emissions. Right, and so if you build a coal plant, the Environmental Protection Agency mandates you have to include this $1 million scrubber, a technology that helps pull the sulfur out so it doesn't go into the air. Right, and we have laws. There's no car in America that can be sold without a catalytic converter. Right, you just have to do it. It's not expensive, $200 or $300, but you can't sell a car without it. Right, so that's a technology standard. You have to do that. Or there's just an emission standard where, as a firm operating, you can't emit more than this many emissions. You just go and figure out how to stay within the limit, which could be some technology you choose to use. But basically, all standards are one of these two buckets. It's directly an emission limit, or you're just mandating a certain technology must be used. And this is what we're doing now. Right? We have practically no examples of this. There's like 3. Right? So we're going to start with this, and then we're going to compare it to these two examples. So this is what we have now. In the U.S., again, we almost entirely use standards. There's about 5 examples I can think of that aren't directly either an emission standard or a technology standard. When the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act passed in the 1970s and the 1960s, when the environmental movement started and we really started passing laws in the United States, there were mostly these standards. And so it appears to be simple and direct, right? I mean, I think we all agree pollution is bad. We do want to reduce it. And so it seems appealing to just say, well, we're just going to make it illegal to have too much of it, and we're going to reduce it. So it seems simple and direct. But the point of economics is to hang dollars on these things and ask the question, yes, we want to reduce pollution down to E star, these emissions down to E star. But it's also important that are we reducing emissions in the least cost way? And so some standards don't get us there. So economists prefer these other two chapters, emission charges or cap and trade, transferable discharge permits. These are called incentive-based policies. So we'll look at these two chapters to emphasize what does that mean to be an incentive-based policy. So the first thing I'll do is I'll tell a simple story to compare all 3 chapters at once with a simple story. And then I'll flesh out next week more details on that. So here's the story. Oh, I think I have enough time. I'll do it real quick, and then we're doing class exercise. We're doing class exercise today. Okay, so let's say we have a river and we have a paper plant that it's marginal abatement. There's some emissions coming from the paper plant. There's some emissions coming from the aluminum plant. 10 units going into the river each. So there's 20 units of emissions going into the river total. And it's causing damage or external cost. Right? Since it's emissions, we'll call it damage. It's causing marginal damage to bystanders. City intake has to incur costs to clean it up, beachgoers, nearby homes. Right? This is directly from the emissions, so we'll call it marginal damage, which you can think of it also as external cost on the bystanders. I mean, you can either think of it as the paper is causing the external cost, the aluminum is causing the external cost, or each emission coming into the river causes marginal damage. That's the terminology we use to separate it out from the good causing the external cost or the emission causing the marginal damage. But again, it's completely these dollars are the same. So let's say, so what we're saying here is we're making it simple. We're saying paper can lower abatement costs $100 per emission. So it's just a straight line, right? Instead of having a more realistic, where it gets more expensive as you reduce emissions, we're just saying they can put a technology in that any unit of emissions reduced is $100. And I'm saying here aluminum also has a straight line, but their straight line is at $500, right? So they also can reduce emissions, but it's 5 times more expensive. The technology they have to put in to get those emissions reduced is 5 times more expensive. So their marginal abatement cost, again, that's per emission, is $500. So it's just more expensive for them to do it. So let's assume a uniform emission standard. The government comes in and says, you can only emit 5E out of here, right? So instead of 10, we're going to put a measuring stick here, a measuring device, and you can only have 5 coming out. Anything more than that's illegal. You can only have 5 coming out. Anything more than that's illegal, like some massive fine. So a penalty, so that you definitely are going to follow the law and reduce it to 5. So here's your class exercise. Last thing we'll do today. And the fine is $1,000 per E if you don't follow the law. So the emission standard is you can only legally emit up to 5. And if you go beyond that, the fine is going to be $1,000 per E. So let's help you out here. So the paper is going to reduce to 5. What is their total abatement cost? What is the paper's total abatement cost to reduce emissions down to 5? And for the aluminum plant, again, they're also going to choose to be 5 because this fine is so massive. What's their total abatement cost? And then look at what is the aggregate total abatement cost. Just add them together. And we only have a couple minutes. And if you have time, then just think about this second part here. We'll probably do this next time. Instead, if there's an emission charge, T star, that's 150 per unit of E. And you can choose any E. How much, just do paper. How much is paper going to choose to emit and what is their total abatement cost? So work on that and then we'll go answers. I'm almost out of time. So these are not hard, it's just basic algebra. So what is the paper's total abatement cost? What's the paper's total abatement cost? Obviously the key is based on this information. That its marginal abatement cost is 100 per E. So what's the paper's total abatement cost? 500, it's just 100 times 5. What's aluminum's total abatement cost? Just 500 times 5. Yeah, it's not hard math I'm doing here. Right, so for paper, they had to abate 5 units. It's 100 for each emission they abate, right? This is abate means you eliminate. So paper incurs 500, aluminum incurs 2,500, as William said. So the aggregate total abatement cost to cut the emissions in the river in half was $3,000. That has been abatement cost that has been incurred. And that abatement cost is going to get passed on to us, and that we're going to pay a little bit more for paper and aluminum, right? As that abatement cost is a cost that increases the production cost of producing paper and aluminum. So if we, and I'll just do it next time. What I'll prove next time is that if we instead used a corrective fee on $150 of emissions, we can get that number less small. So I'm out of time. I will do that next time. Do a cliffhanger today. So now do your daily writing. Ask a question, write a summary. Something interesting about today. Read chapters 11, 12, and 13. You can see my first story here is going to include all 3 chapters at once. So read all 3 chapters because I'm just going to cover them. I'm just going to compare them all at the exact same time. So we're not going to deal with them separately. I'm going to do all 3 chapters jointly. This one story here, we're going to do T star here, and the next time I'm going to do a cap and trade. And we're just going to compare it with a simple story. And then we're going to make it, well, this story has a constant abatement cost. What if we had more realistic abatement costs? But the viewpoint of economics, the nice thing about economics is a more complicated story is just like the simple story. It's just more realistic. But the fundamental concepts don't change.